So there are dozens of philosophers to choose from if you're going to try to, cover the history of dialectics. I think even an exhaustive essay doesn't have to mention each one. There must be some key ones, and I think going back to antiquity, pre-antiquity, actually, I guess with Heraclitus, I think he's before. Super great. He, in very few words, he put forth. It's at least something that was attributed to him. Probably was. I think it's safe to say. He said, "All things are requital for fire. Fire is requital for all things," which is perfectly lyrical, metaphorical way to sum it up. And I think it really is about looking at something from an opposite point of view, something that may even seem ridiculous at first. It also speaks to Heidegger, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So, fire and requital is not necessarily all about opposition. I wouldn't say it's about opposition at all. Ultimately, and I think all of it really speaks to nonviolence, non-aggression, and it also just shows how right Martin Luther King was, because you have an untenable situation and no army to force the issue violently. And violence would only make matters worse anyway. It gets harder and harder for me to see any instance where like throwing the first punch or firing the first shot is the best move as a given. It's not like telling a lie. The more aggressive, the more that is going on offense and not even being defensive. So the more aggressive that first shot is, like an assassination, as if that's going to fix anything. Because the thing about violent or even simply aggressive opposition, and of course we've seen that the last few years a lot, and even aggressive opposition ends up radicalizing the other side, and that side is busy radicalizing side A, or whatever you want to call it. So I think those are the pretty good first thoughts about that. I guess the other possibility is going beyond the realm of what can be rather academic philosophy. So, Shakespeare would be awesome. There's probably lots of poetry that has, that touches upon dialectics in some way. It seems to kind of be rather fluent in describing something that isn't familiar, and I think that's why we use lyric, not lyrics in terms of song specifically, but anything written or spoken that's lyrical. And it's not as much about softening the message nearly as much as it is about like a Zen koan, which is a terrific example, is if you're going to attempt to get somebody to think in a different way and without a very lengthy, laborious conversation or presentation or also especially argument, if you bring it up as a debate, it's not really where this is at. A lot of it can just be observed and tested very readily. The other thought was, other arts, other I don't know, other fields. Science would actually be pretty good, I think. The best practice of science has a thesis, and then there's a counter thesis, an antithesis, that comes along, and it's either proven or disproven or incorporated. I guess science can be a little bit more severe because previous theories can be utterly disproven. We had Greeks had an idea of how light worked, and in a way, you could still think about that dialectically because, in a sense, they were right. And really, like, when the disagreements are semantic, it really bogs it down, and there's a lot of inability out there to think metaphorically and to allow two unrelated things to be analogous. An analogy just needs to, between two things, just needs to be an instance where they share a similar pattern. It doesn't have, the same motives don't have to apply, the same results don't have to apply. The people have a problem with that. They're awfully concrete in some cases, where like they insist that all of the black and white needs to be identifiable, and then when they are presented with something very concrete, they dissemble and they make excuses. Lots of logical fallacies to deny facts. It's so weird, people getting offended over an idea when the idea is not an existential threat. There are ideas that are existential threats. Those get downplayed. If people are talking about separatism and nationalism and all that stuff, we know what that is. We know for a fact what that is. It's undeniable. Now, if they seemed as though they were totally okay with peaceful means of separating, establishing a territory of some kind, I don't see a problem with that. I really don't. So I think the element of give and take can really be applied much more than what a lot of people are thinking. Because this opposition, the more aggressive opposition is, and even in a situation that seems like clear good and evil, if and when it's reasonable, offer them something of what they want. Because there are times when that's possible. I think that's a good example of that. They want their own land to have their kind of freedom and have their kind of autonomy. And who doesn't like freedom and autonomy? And when you oppose that, they do take that as an existential threat. And that might be a perception that cannot be changed. I know we want to stick to certain ideals, but I think we need to look at how much of that is ideology. Because our inclusion can certainly be an ideal that can turn into ideology, which is weird to think of, because inclusion is about, at the very least, tolerance, and really beyond that, it's beyond tolerance. It's appreciation, acceptance, that kind of thing. And so if the opposition is strenuously rejecting the need to accept, then why don't we try playing by the rules just a little bit and make an offer? Clearly there's a lot of people in this country that don't want to be around each other, and that's across the board. That's not, when you sort of, people don't want to think they're being, there's a false equivalency between them. They see themselves as the in-group, and then they see whatever the other side is as the out-group. But in the general sense, in the general way, isn't everybody pretty even on that score? Like I don't see a need to be around those people. I just like to exercise my autonomy to just not be around them. So if people aren't getting along, why not have a timeout? I mean, preschool. This is preschool level stuff that we forgot. Best case scenario, everybody shares and shares alike. But that is best case scenario. There's no guarantee. And if the two kids can't share and they're not going to reconcile, you know what? Maybe next time. But for now, give a timeout of some kind in a way that is as respectful as possible. Kids don't like to be belittled. Adults don't like to be belittled. That is not going to change. It absolutely will not. So people belittling each other doesn't, like anybody belittling somebody else, for the most part, that's not going to accomplish the goal that they have in mind. Maybe they are just there to fight, which is pointless. If you're just there to be violent, then I think, it's not a tenable situation. It's ultimate self-destructive. It's like every act of violence is terrorism, whether you know it or not. So it's when you're really going to throw a punch, you better believe in it, because there are consequences, and you can't know what all of those consequences are. And that being the case, if you're seriously going to clock somebody out, you really should be ready to kill. Unless you're defending yourself. But when you're defending yourself, really the same thing. You better be ready to kill if you are going to engage. If you can't turn the other cheek, if you can't run, if you can't get out. So I think that's why that's the thing about violence. There isn't really a dialectic for violence, I don't think. I guess if we could turn all wars into boxing matches without any, at least with fewer fatalities, that would be great. Totally, I would do whatever I could to see that happen if that could be a thing. And who knows, maybe 100 years in the future, yeah, that's what we'll do. But I don't know. I don't have the imagination to see how we can use violence as a negotiation. That seems like hostage taking, or I don't know. It just doesn't compute. I can't even think of what that would look like, I guess. But maybe I'll work on it. Well, recording is getting a little long. My phone's gonna probably fill up. Maybe, I don't know. Also, when these are too long, they're hard to upload. I would think. Maybe I just end it there. Yeah, a lot of it reaffirms that violence is not a solution, really, no matter who you are. Obi-Wan Kenobi was right, and just to be clear, if I remember right, he would not draw first. Somebody else would draw. He was quicker and more skilled for the most part. And then ultimately, he probably... Yeah, here's the thing. It's not really depicted in, whatever it was, episode 4, which is the first one. I feel like it would have been interesting if the audience had at least had a sense that Kenobi could have absolutely taken down Darth Vader. If we had a sense of that, maybe not a certainty, but that self-sacrifice moment is interesting. And he told Vader, "If you strike me down, I will become more powerful than you could ever know." And it's I guess it's like an Aikido move to the hilt. He decides not to strike. Of course, in reality, we don't have Force ghosts and all the rest. But I think you could make the case that anybody assassinated, no matter what side they're on, who the assassin is working for, the motives behind the killing, it would almost make more sense for some faction or another to assassinate their own at a point where they felt like they would make better use of a martyr than they would of, whoever that leader or figure is. And who knows, it seems plausible that has already happened in the past. The Brotherhood, what they call the Muslim Brotherhood or Brotherhood of Islam, I can't remember, who's basically at least suspected or highly suspected of assassinating Malcolm X. They didn't want the next part of his career to take form. And their fear was probably unfounded. I mean, he was still going to champion and take the fight to a different level. And it was it's not like he went over to the other side. They were they were being extremist by killing Malcolm X. He had actually reached a changing point in his life where he disavowed violent means. And he still gets quoted by saying by any means necessary. And maybe he wouldn't actually reverse that. He would maybe just have a different intention with it. He might redefine necessary. And he may have reached the point where he realized that there are a lot of cases where violence isn't necessary and it actually is fully counterproductive. So that would be a really good example as well. The example of Malcolm X. I don't know a lot of the details of the assassination of Martin Luther King. Seems like maybe the ultimate motives of his assassination. I'm not sure how clear we are on that. But something to look up. That's at least something I could research, unlike other things that are so difficult. Anyway, that's about it. I'm rambling, and that's probably about right.